In the world of true crime, some cases haunt us for years, leaving us with more questions than answers. Disappearances, especially those that remain unsolved for decades, have a way of twisting reality. These cases aren't just about people vanishing. They're about the layers of mystery, deception, and often chilling secrets that emerge over time. In this story, we will uncover shocking twists and disappearances that you may have never known. Twists that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's get started with. Emma Cole was the kind of woman you wouldn't notice in a crowd. In the small town of Oak Ridge, she was known for her quiet nature, her unassuming appearance, and her love of books. Emma worked as the town librarian, a job that seemed to suit her perfectly. Every morning she would open the doors of the Oak Ridge Public Library, a grand, slightly worn building that stood as a monument to the town's history. Emma had no family in Oak Ridge, but she had friends, mostly elderly regulars who would come for their daily dose of literature and a chat. She kept to herself, but everyone knew her. She was the quiet, dependable woman who always smiled, always had a book recommendation, and always seemed at peace with her life. But in October 2013, Emma Cole disappeared. It began as a simple worry. Emma didn't show up for dinner at her mother's house. It wasn't like Emma to miss dinner, and it certainly wasn't like her to not respond to her mother's texts. Ann Cole, Emma's mother, had grown accustomed to Emma's predictable life and had no reason to believe that anything out of the ordinary was happening. So, when the phone calls went unanswered, Ann assumed her daughter was busy, as usual. But as the hours stretched on, unease began to settle in. Ann drove to the library, a trip that should have been routine. But when she arrived, the doors to the library were locked, and no one answered her knocks. Inside, the dim lights of the library were on, the same lights that Emma would often leave on when she was working late. Ann's heart began to race, her palms sweating as she unlocked the door with her spare key. The library was eerily silent. Emma's desk lamp was still glowing, casting a soft, warm light across the room. Books lay scattered across the desk as though Emma had been interrupted mid-task. But there was no sign of Emma. Her purse was gone, but her coat and keys were left behind. There was no note, no explanation. Panic set in, and Ann called the police. The search for Emma began immediately, but days turned into weeks with no new leads. The town had no answers. Her disappearance was baffling. There was no sign of a struggle, no ransom note, no witnesses, no reason. The case went cold quickly, and Emma Cole became another name in a file that no one wanted to remember. Months passed, and the memory of Emma faded from Oak Ridge's collective consciousness. People moved on, returning to their normal lives, but Ann never gave up. Every night she would sit in Emma's room, clutching the books her daughter had loved, hoping for a sign, a clue. One cold evening, nearly 6 months after Emma's disappearance, Ann received an anonymous letter. It simply read, "She's not gone. She's still here waiting." Ann's heart skipped a beat as she held the letter, wondering if she had just received the first clue to finding her daughter. Detective Sarah Martinez was new to Oak Ridge. She had come from a larger city, seeking a quieter life, away from the hustle and stress of urban crime. Oak Ridge seemed like the perfect place to start fresh. The town was small, sleepy, and had a low crime rate. But when Sarah was assigned to look into the disappearance of Emma Cole, she couldn't help but sense that something was terribly wrong. Sarah had read through Emma's case file, and she wasn't satisfied. There were too many unanswered questions. The way Emma had vanished without a trace, the lack of clues, and the eerie silence that followed her disappearance. It all seemed too strange. No one could provide any real insight into Emma's life. She had been quiet, yes, but she wasn't a hermit. She had friends, people who knew her well enough to speak to her character, but none could offer any theories as to why she might have left. Just when Sarah thought she was getting nowhere, she caught wind of something disturbing. A new case had come to her desk, another missing woman, Lisa Maxwell, an artist who had lived in Oak Ridge for several years. Lisa had also been a frequent visitor to the library, often sitting in a corner with her sketchbook. She had been seen the day before her disappearance, working on a painting at the library. Lisa's disappearance mirrored Emma's in unsettling ways. No sign of a struggle, no ransom note, no witnesses. But there was one thing Sarah couldn't shake, a feeling that Emma and Lisa were connected in some way. The more Sarah investigated Lisa's life, the more she realized that Lisa and Emma had been closer than anyone had realized. They both had been part of a local book club. Sarah found a series of old emails between Lisa and someone who only signed their name with the letter E. The messages were filled with strange comments and cryptic warnings. "I think I'm being watched. Something's closing in on me, Lisa. Be careful. Watch your back." The more Sarah read, the more she realized that Emma had been communicating something darker before she vanished. Sarah pieced together the timeline. Lisa's disappearance occurred just a few weeks after Emma's. Both women had attended the same book club, both had frequented the same quiet library, and both had seemed to have experienced something disturbing, something that led them to leave behind cryptic messages and warnings. Was someone targeting them? Or was it possible that they were involved in something much larger? The connection between the two women was starting to seem less coincidental. The mysterious pattern. Sarah's investigation began to take her down a path she never expected. She began to uncover a disturbing pattern of disappearances stretching back decades, all connected to the Oak Ridge Public Library. The more she researched, the more she realized that the library wasn't just a simple place of books and quiet. It was the epicenter of something much darker. As she delved into the library's history, Sarah learned that it had been built on the grounds of a long-abandoned asylum, one that had been closed in the 1960s after several controversial and unethical experiments had been uncovered. The asylum had been home to patients who were subjected to extreme treatments, lobotomies, mind control experiments, and psychiatric drug trials. The records were destroyed when the asylum was shut down, but Sarah found a few fragments of information that painted a chilling picture. One name stood out: Dr. Samuel Richards. He had been the lead psychiatrist at the asylum and was notorious for his unorthodox methods. Sarah uncovered that he had been experimenting with methods of mind manipulation and memory alteration. The patients who underwent these procedures were often left with blank, vacant expressions, as though their identities had been wiped away. Could Dr. Richards have continued his experiments after the asylum was closed? Had he been using the library as a cover for his twisted work? Sarah began to fear that the disappearances were part of a larger, more sinister plan, one that reached far beyond simple abductions. The pattern was becoming clearer. The women who had disappeared were all connected to the library. But the question remained: why? What was Dr. Richards trying to accomplish? And how had he managed to continue his work in secret? Sarah's search for answers reached a pivotal moment when she uncovered an old journal hidden in the library's basement. It had been written by Mary Ashton, a former librarian who had worked in the library in the 1960s. The journal was filled with frantic and fragmented entries, some of which spoke of strange occurrences at the library. Mary had written about the asylum patients coming to the library, their faces blank and their movements stiff, as though they were under some form of control. The most disturbing entry read, "He's still here. He's never left. Dr. Richards is still taking them, the ones who have disappeared." As Sarah read those words, a chill ran down her spine. Dr. Richards had never left. He had continued his work, hiding in plain sight at the library. And now, Sarah feared, Emma and Lisa had been his latest victims. Sarah continued her investigation into Dr. Richards, digging through old asylum records and library archives. The pieces were falling into place. Dr. Richards had used the library as a front for his mind control experiments. He had been erasing the memories of his victims, replacing their identities with fabricated lives. And when they were no longer useful, he disposed of them, leaving no trace behind. Late one night, Sarah returned to the library, a sense of urgency pressing her forward. She had pieced together the truth, but there was something she needed to see, something that would confirm everything. In the library's basement, she found a hidden door behind a stack of old books. It led down a narrow staircase, and as Sarah descended into the darkness, she could hear the faint sound of a video recorder playing. In a small hidden room, Sarah found a collection of old videotapes, each labeled with the name of a missing woman, including Emma and Lisa. The last tape, labeled Emma, was the one Sarah had been waiting for. As she watched the tape, the horror unfolded. Emma, dazed and vacant, was seated in front of a camera. The footage revealed the extent of Dr. Richards' experiments, mind-altering drugs, psychological manipulation, and the erasure of memories. Emma had been one of his subjects, her mind rewritten, her identity erased. The truth hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. These women hadn't just vanished, they had been taken, altered, and erased. As she turned to leave, the door behind her creaked open, and there stood Dr. Samuel Richards, his cold eyes fixed on her.